Say, don't give
Okay,
it away.
folks, just before we start the walk, I'll give you a little talk. I remember in the 1950s when I was a young lad, 7 or 8 years old, my mother picking up the Chronicle and Echo and going absolutely potty about the M1 motorway that was going to slash through Northamptonshire. She was convinced it was going to ruin places like Hartwell, Courtnall, Milton Crematorium, where my dad's ashes were, Kislingbury Floor. They're all going to be washed out by this motorway, and she was absolutely appalled by it. Who wants to go from London to Crick, she said. Nobody wants to go to Crick. What's it all about? She carried on alarming about this wretched motorway. When it opened, we walked across the fields from my grandmother's house at Floor towards Brockhall and looked at this new motorway on the first Sunday, and there wasn't a car in sight. I told you so. Oh dear. So my cousin and I, who was the same age, scrabbled down the bank and stood on the hard shoulder looking for cars, would you believe? You wouldn't do that today, would you? When we stood there 5 minutes probably before a car appeared from the north and one went from the south, and that was it. We were absolutely appalled by this awful motorway. And it must have been the same in Roade when the railway came to Northamptonshire. The people in the know, the educated people, obviously knew it was coming, but the poor devils who lived in Roade, the farmers who couldn't read and write, knew nothing about it. And it must have been absolutely horrendous when this railway was coming. So every week at Courtnall, a wealthy man who went to Parliament knew all about it, and he was convinced the railway would follow the canal from Watford to Rugby, and it wouldn't be anything to do with him at all. It'd be out the way, he wouldn't see it, wouldn't hear it, everything was great. And one morning he had a shock. The men came running to the house and said, "There's men on the fields, over the road, over the turnpike, in our fields, what are we going to do about it?" And the new in was over there, and he thought perhaps they may have been drinkers in the pub or having a walk round, but he got men together, sticks and staves and a few shotguns, and set out over here to sort these men out in his fields. And they said, "We're surveying for the new railway, Sir Hereward." And that really pleased him. He told him they were going to build a cut-in rather than a tunnel. Robert Stephenson was going to build the railway, and he said, "No way, I'm going to build a tunnel in Roade." After the canal tunnel at Brisbane to Stoke caused lots of problems, and he was going to build a cut-in. So Sir Hereward went home, he contacted the Spencers at Althorpe and the Duke of Grafton, who owned the land to the south, and they both said, "Tough titty, we're in favour of the railway." The Spencers were miles away, their house was miles away from the railway, and the Duke of Grafton was in league with the railway people. He was falling over backwards to help them, and they told him that when they built their terminus in London, they would call it Euston, after his stately home, Euston Hall, in Suffolk. So he had no joy there. He appointed some engineers to survey for a tunnel rather than a cut-in, and presented it to the directors, and they said, "That's a good idea, it's cheaper than a cut-in, let's go with that." But Stevenson said, "No way, if you make me build a tunnel, I'm off. I'm not going to stop and build a wretched tunnel that's going to cause me problems." So he set out his stall with the railway people, and they agreed with him. They said, "OK, we'll have to go with him. That's the man we want, we'll build a cut-in." And then 1,000 men suddenly descended on Roade from all over the place, mainly Irish, Welsh, Scotch, navvies, rough crowd, definitely about that. They had to live in 60 huts, which we shall see where it was over there, in really rough conditions. They lived in a mattress palliasse, straw palliasse on the floor. One man slept one half the day, the other man came the other half of the day and slept on the same palliasse. They were well fed and watered, but unfortunately the hygiene was horrendous. They all had lots of problems with the sewage and that sort of thing, and typhus and smallpox broke out very quickly, and the death rate obviously rose. In the first year, well, before the railway came, in Roade there was perhaps 6 or 8 deaths a year. In the first year there was 100 deaths, mainly from the injuries, from the building, from the disease and things like that. The local ladies thought they were sitting on a fortune, and they got involved with the men as well, didn't they? Which caused even more problems, because they associated with the men and took the problems back to the houses with them, of course. So it caused a lot of bad feeling with the men who lived in the village, and there was all sorts of fights and all manner of things going on in the village at that time. Stevens had lots of problems on a Friday after payday. Next day was a dead loss. They were all absolutely Brahms and less, weren't they? They weren't going to work on the Saturday. So he introduced a 2-week pay structure, which didn't go down very well, and it was no better. So he then said, "We'll go 4 weeks and pay them every 4 weeks." But every 4 weeks, it was a nightmare. I think they drunk more in 4 weeks than they did in 2, but it was a real problem. The cut is 1.5 miles long. Its average depth is 65 feet, and they moved 1 million cubic yards of soil to build the embankments either side at Brisbane and at Ashton. They needed the earth to build the embankments there. As they started digging, they hit problems straight away. When I moved to Roade, I lived in a new build bungalow, and the builder put some soil down. I wouldn't call it topsoil. When I wanted a lawn, I decided to double dig it, and I dug up stones, as Sylvia will now show us. It goes from the post like that. I got enough stone to as big as my car, Morris 1000 car. It was a pile of stones out this little bit of earth that I dug for this lawn. And the builder said, that's very handy. We'll use that for hardcore in the next build down the bottom. So they cast all the stone away for me, but it was absolutely horrendous, and it's still coming up now. And as we walk around, you'll see it in the ground as we go around by the cutting. It got so bad they had to use gunpowder. They used 3,000 barrels of gunpowder, 26 a week they were using to blast the soil out, which was absolutely horrendous. The cost was double what they thought. The navvies lived, worked and played very hard. It started in the reign of William IV in 1834, and it took 4 years to complete. It was an absolutely horrendous job. The first train went through in June, and then the first passenger train went through in September 1838, and that's why we're here celebrating today. The first cut-in was just 2 tracks. It was hewn out of the rock. You can see the rock here, and that was the original line from London to Birmingham that didn't go to Northampton. Robert Stephenson was so despairing about the finishing of the railway. It was completed from London to Bletchley near Denby Hall, and it was completed from Rugby to Birmingham, and they put the people off the trains at Denby Hall on the A5 on a stagecoach and took them up to Rugby and got them on the trains at Rugby, which was a big nightmare. Directors were upset and he was getting a lot of pressure, so he moved to Roade. He had a house built on the cutting just up there so he could keep an eye on the men, what was happening, and he was on the spot sort of thing. So he lived there while it got finished and got things sorted out. The railway got so busy that they thought they must widen this line to 4 tracks. The Midland Railway from the East Midlands was coming down from Leicester to Rugby, and all their trains were coming this way as well. So it got busier and busier and busier, and they had to build 4 tracks. So they negotiated with Harry Wood at Courton Hall, and he said, that's great, you can come on my land, you can build the cutting wider, but you must sort out my water problems in Courton Hall. That's water to drink, not the other sort of water. And they built a reservoir for him over on the Courton Hall estate, which is still there underground, which supplies the Courton Hall village and estate with water. He put an aqueduct in across the railway, which you shall see, which stores the water before it goes to the reservoir. And if it gets too full, it overflows and runs down here, past the village hall and away to the River Tove below Ashton. So that did them a favour, really. When it was widened, of course, Stevenson's house was in the way, so they knocked it down brick by brick, and they rebuilt it on the corner of the A508 over there, White House, on the corner over there. It was first of all a poultry farm, and then it was a factory making heels for ladies' shoes. So it has been a house of Stephenson, a factory, a farm and all sorts. It's now a private house. The 2 new lines were built between 1875 and 1882. It meant extra depth to the cutting, and another 1,000 men waltzed in to build that as well. They started digging out from either end and got the stuff away, which must have been a problem keeping the trains running as well. In 1890, at the Black Bridge, which is that picture there, the whole lot collapsed into the cutting on the new line. So that's the Black Bridge on the Courton Hall Road, that's the old line going to Blisworth, and the whole lot collapsed into the cutting, which was an absolute nightmare. The trains had to stop, and it took another 4 years to get that cleared by another lot of navvies that came in again. They lived in different parts of the village, but they still caused the same sort of problems. Hooliganism, fights, rape, pillage, all sorts of things. So, big nightmare. They built supporting walls to keep the cutting back. They put girders in, which we always called the bird cage. It's still called the bird cage. Ground's not in, sagely. And they camped in the field just as before. The conditions were probably better, but not ideal, I'm sure. And the same problems occurred in the village as they did in the 1830s. All sorts of problems. So let's go and see where the men lived and look at the railway up here.